there.
Well, I think we should get started. Just I know everybody is anxious to celebrate Shabbat Shalom. It's Sabbath, and so you want to go home now. I'm just kidding. You probably don't know what that is, but I wanted to welcome everybody here tonight, and we are going to take comments first from the public, or questions, and then we would we have a presentation, I think, from staff to answer some of the previous questions that have come up. And normally we give you 3 minutes. If you have a little bit longer, we'll let you go on a little bit longer. There's not so many of you here tonight, but thank you for coming out on a Friday night. We really appreciate it. And so if you want to just raise your hands, Eileen is here to give you a microphone through the audience, so you don't have to come up to the podium. And
We actually have a sign-up sheet.
Oh, good. Okay. There's sign-up sheets. Good.
Good.
Then that would be good. I will call your name.
There we go.
Okay. Okay. The first person is Samuel N. Woods. Samuel, are you here? Go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you. I stand opposed to the amended agreement for Banning Lewis Ranch. I do not believe that development which is unable to pay for its own infrastructure is a good idea. It impoverishes us all. There are many unknowns in this agreement, with marginal benefits amounting to approximately 0.5% of 2017 city budget revenues per year. What is the worst case scenario under this agreement? I've not seen it described, and I believe that it's very important for us to know that before any attempt to proceed is made. Doing otherwise would be insanity. Falcon currently has a population 2.5% the size of Colorado Springs. It has a negligible effect upon our infrastructure, and that is no reason to provide a handout to developers in order to expedite development of Banning Lewis Ranch. Of the 2 major roads leading there, we've already paid to maintain one and are not responsible for maintaining the other. Colorado Springs density today is lower than such exemplars of sprawl such as Houston, Phoenix, or Omaha, where recently they have been returning roads to gravel because they are unable to pay to maintain them. We already have 5,700 lane miles of roads today. How much more sprawl can we add until we're forced to do the same? Adding large amounts of cheaply available land will not reduce sprawl. It will do the opposite as it has elsewhere. Instead of engaging in this unwise course of action, I suggest that you promote higher density development instead. Townhomes, condos, or making it easier to put up accessory dwelling units would all be easy steps that we could engage in to greatly increase the population of Colorado Springs without greatly increasing its footprint. Another example would be simply reducing parking minimums, which have resulted in large parking lots which are never full, being put to no productive use. Excluding costs for schools, transit, and using an unrealistically low estimate for infrastructure maintenance costs creates a skewed comparison that overstates benefits and understates risks. I ask that you not improve the amended agreement. In short, I believe in Colorado Springs, but do not believe that yet another handout is right for Colorado Springs. Thank you.
Thank you, Samuel. Gary Casimir. Casimir, come on up. Or no, he's going to pass. Okay. Steve Mulliken. You're going to pass too. Okay. John Edward Hawk.
Good evening, City Council. Thank you for your time and your efforts to guide the city. I especially thank Councilman Murray, Strand, Gabler, and Avila for your critical thinking questions and observations regarding the proposals by developers to seriously change the development requirements on Banning Lewis Ranch. Pardon my pun, but I am not a Johnny-come-lately with a limited knowledge base about urban planning. In college at CC, I was involved in urban studies component extensively for quite a while. When I taught for District 11, wrote and taught a unit on urban problems, urban developments with required urban planning component. With that was a developed slide presentation, multiple screens, urban problems, sprawl, leapfrog developments. And since 1968, I've been involved with urban issues, actively involved with many city councils on issues such as parks, bicycle path systems, development, and City for Champions most recently. I've done extensive reading and research on the issue of urban planning. To name a few publications I'm familiar with, the book Urban Sprawl Costs and Economic Impacts of Unchecked Growth by Burchell, Downs, and others, 2006. Urban Sprawl and the Cost of Public Services, Carruthers, Ulfarsson, 2003. John Carruthers specifies 12 measures of public expenditures to be aware of and properly fund when adding new developments to an urban area, such as the Banning Lewis Ranch. Total direct expenditures, capital facilities, utilities, roadways, other transportation, i.e. mass transit, bicycle lanes, sewerage, trash collection, housing community development, police protection, fire protection, parks, education, and libraries. Clearly, the major developers are having buyer's remorse, that's what I would call it, and expect major changes in what they must pay for in the public expenditures areas after they already purchased the land. They knew what the agreement said. This is a violation of their purchase agreement, and the annexation agreement has been upheld by the federal courts already. So what's the deal? They signed an agreement, they owned the land, they knew it was expected. They must fully pay for wastewater facilities, such as a regional sized plant, not some small thing or extended pipelines. Open space and parks, certainly. Nothing's been provided for there. Utility extensions, that's costly to extend all utility lines out there. All needed police and fire stations. The 6-lane north-south Banning Lewis Parkway, that's been removed from the plans. If the city, that's us, all of us here and many others, allows the developers to externalize, pass on their costs onto existing city people and the debt, Colorado Springs will be in serious financial trouble. I've already looked at the city debt, and then you add it to utility debt, it's pretty big. We are $1.8 billion behind on unfunded capital improvement needs. The response times for police and fire seriously endanger those of us already here. The neglect of the existing city is visibly obvious and deeply concerning. A lot of our young people do not want to live here any longer because the city looks really trashed. Okay? The city charter specifies that land use matters lie within the powers of council, not the mayor, to decide. I expect, as a taxpayer and resident, the council to fully involve itself with the Banning Lewis Ranch annexation, provide citizens with an extended period of time to thoroughly examine the serious economic impacts of any annexation agreement changes. Citizens must be appointed to a study panel, and all discussions must be totally transparent. I will return at a later time with further research that I'm doing on this issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Susan Davies.
Thank you. And thank you for being here this Friday evening and all the hours of service that you provide our community. I'd like to share, and I'll just give these to you, and if you wouldn't mind passing these along. They're going to look familiar to you. These are from the most recent Parks Master Plan that many of you participated in, that this community participated in, and at the end of the day, it was something that we embraced, and it was our vision for the future. and it was passed unanimously by the City Council. As you look on the east side of the map page, it shows all the candidate open space areas. And you can see that a large swath, thousands of acres, in blue to the east of the airport, encompass this ranch. So the community looked at growth patterns, needs, and said, you know, as we plan for the future, we want to make sure that a large area of land, maybe 5,000 to 6,000 acres, are preserved for the people that are going to be moving to the east side of the community. Because we know not only does this area have conservation values and important paleontological and archaeological values, but these people are going to need a place to recreate, to hike, to mountain bike, for disc golf, for whatever it is that they need and want to do. This is going to be their area to play. And it's really our last great area on the east side for them to play. This will be their Red Rock, their Ute Valley Park, their Cheyenne Mountain State Park. It'll be all out here. If we don't provide this, couple things. We are not serving the legacy of the founder of this community. He had the vision knowing that those kinds of swaths of land had to be preserved for that population that would burgeon, that is burgeoning and will continue. It's your turn to stand in those footsteps and say, before anything is agreed, any annexation agreement is passed, first and foremost, that this vision has to be paramount to where we're going as a community. It's our last chance to do it. It's our chance to do it. If we don't, these people are going to be coming to the west side to use those amazing properties, and those crowded parks are going to just get that much more crowded. So not only do we not serve the folks on the east side, but the entire community suffers. So I would ask you, and my board has directed me, unanimously passed at our last meeting, that Colorado Springs pursues the TOPS open space applications, preserving a large portion of Banning Lewis Ranch with important conservation values, 4,000 to 5,000, and it's already been applied for in the TOPS open space process, and it is in the master plan, prior to amending the annexation agreement. So that's the first thing I would ask. And then quickly, secondly, right now we have 20 parks on the list to be built. We have $200 million of capital needs for the Parks Department. And we all know at this point, there is no way that work is going to be completed. There is no funding available to get that $200 million addressed and get those 20 existing parks done. If we don't require that the developers out in Banning Lewis, as part of your annexation agreement, if we don't require that they not only donate the property, but also build the parks and maintain the parks, and if we think that the city parks budget is going to be able to shoulder that, we are fooling ourselves, and we are not serving those people that are going to be moving to that side of town. We absolutely have to address it. We can't kick that can down the road. We have to address that. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Yeah.
So Susan, help me now on your first part. I want to just make sure I'm clear. Before we modify the annexation agreement, you want us to purchase land with the TOPS, or what are you asking us to delay until? What
Thank
action?
you, Don. I appreciate that. So I guess what we're asking is, we just haven't heard a lot of conversation about that huge swath of open space. It's sort of like, well, we think they're going to do the right thing. We don't have any agreement or promise from the developer that they intend to make sure that part of this whole plan means that all of that open space property in the master plan is saved. We want that kind of a promise, whatever form that takes. We would like assurances that that is the overarching vision of this.
Okay. I know there is a very unique paleontological, whatever that site. And that's the only thing that I heard that is really distinct and unique out there. Is there other open space that it has to be that 5,000 acres, or could it be any 5,000 acres out of the 24,000?
As you see that green blob, it's the blue blob, whatever we call it on that plan, but essentially So essentially, it's an area that has been studied, that's been looked at, and because, you have Jimmy Camp Creek that runs through it, so it's a natural waterway, greenway, and then plus, as you say, the paleontological, archaeological that we're finding in
That's
some of
what
that
I
area.
tried to say, yeah.
You got very close, you're fine. But I think based on those conservation values, that is the area that we're looking at that should be preserved.
So you have specific acreage.
We do.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, Andy?
Yeah, I'm kind of curious looking at this chart because it says candidate open space areas and candidate open space network. That encompasses almost the entire area.
Well,
So
it's not the whole
south of
24,000
24.
acres, but it's a lot of it.
Well, it's almost everything south of 24. So are you suggesting that as part of the annexation agreement modification that we compel them to sell it to us?
I think we should have the conversation and say, because it doesn't mean there couldn't be houses maybe in parts of it or on the edges of it. It just means that we at least look at the opportunity that TOPS could purchase that, or maybe some of it could be donated, but that a large swath of that area that's probably better for open space than development anyway, that there would be a commitment to do so, because it is part of the Parks Master Plan.
Yeah, but when they say candidate,
Candidate means that those people came together and said, as we look to the future, these are the areas around this community that should be turned into open space. We haven't bought them yet. They haven't been available. But they are candidate open spaces because they have all those values that we as a community believe should be preserved.
They were part of the original open space master plan. When we passed TOPS, it was the Jimmy Camp Creek areas were, and
Well,
not only Jimmy Camp Creek, but many areas in the Bangladesh Ranch were identified as actually, it was the number 2 in terms of priority of all the candidate areas because of the special features of it. And I think what you're saying, Susan, is that we don't have a plan for that yet, that we're going to pass this annexation agreement without anything really certain about what that future is going to be.
And it's too important to leave it to
We should have
that.
that beforehand, is
Exactly.
what you're saying.
And just to add on to that, so the HP property is part of Ute Valley Park. That was a candidate open space. Red Rock, a long time ago, was a candidate open space. Think of it was now townhouses and golf course.
I'm not arguing that point. What I'm arguing is you have almost the entire area.
It's at least 5,000 to 7,000 acres, but we're talking about 24,000.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
And about 800 to 1,000 are already set aside, aren't they?
Through
with
Corral Bluffs
and Jimmy Camp Creek. So you're talking about maybe 3,000 to 4,000 more acres, and mostly in that triangle between 94 and 24.
And then along the Jimmy Camp corridor to the
Yeah,
south.
yeah. Okay, yeah, Don.
Question for Peter then. Have you looked at this, and is any of the acreage they're asking for developable, or is it, you've learned us the term, or taught us the term total gross acreage, or now I forgot the term that you taught us, developable acreage versus gross acreage. So out of the 24,000 that's in here, are we asking for land that is going to take money out of developers' profit that they could build on with this master plan?
If I understand your question correctly, no, we have not looked at the land suitability for development. Certainly, the restated annexation agreement does not preclude the city to enter any type of negotiations with land trust organizations, nonprofits, or the owners. So no, I don't have a better answer for you today. It's something we can take a look at for the future. Okay.
Me too.
Okay. Next person is David Gardner. Come on up, or stand where you are, whichever you like.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Dave Gardner, and I want to thank you, members of the City Council, for giving up your Friday night to be here doing this. I really appreciate it. And thanks to everybody who is out here in the gallery for giving up your Friday night as well. I have one question and 3 points for my maybe 3.5 minutes allotted here. The question is, I'm getting the impression that the proposed amendments maybe are writing off our last chance to actually have the possibility of a limited access freeway bypass on the east side of Colorado Springs, and I find that a little bit unbelievable. So I'm really wondering if my interpretation is correct, that the current existing annexation agreement paves the way for us to possibly actually do what we wish we had done with Powers, and whether the proposed amendments takes that away. That's my question. And then the 3 points. My first point is I'm bothered by the fiscal analysis that's based on current levels of service. No one is happy with current levels of service. And the analysis suggests a very minimal $1.6 million per year of revenue surplus. That's about 1/200th of the city budget. It's practically a rounding error. And it could easily tip into deficit territory. Plus, they can only forecast that surplus if we're all willing to continue suffering substandard levels of service that we have today. So we can only conclude that this barely pays for itself as long as we don't want our streets maintained prudently, our police to respond quickly when we have an emergency, all our parks to be completed and maintained, and good bus service. Second point, the requirements and arrangements of the past 20 or 30 years of annexations and development projects have resulted in a city that can't afford to have good bus service, well-maintained parks, streets resurfaced on schedule, and police that show up on time. Now, yes, Tabor has probably played a role in that, but we have Tabor, and we need to plan accordingly. It seems to me you're being asked to amend this one smarter annexation agreement to give Banning Lewis Ranch developers equity with developers of those other projects. Can we logically expect that doing that won't result in just more of the budget challenges that we've been facing? If this proposal gets approved, I'd like to propose we rename the ranch. Let's call it Insanity Ranch. You guys know the definition of insanity. This agreement doesn't have to be similar to those others. It was agreed to. If we equalize it with what is required of other developers, then we'd better hope the ranch is never developed, because I'm afraid its build-out would just bankrupt the city. Finally, third point. This is, I think someone else pointed this out, this is a legislative land use matter. It's city council business, and it's a really huge, huge matter. It should never have been negotiated behind closed doors, and definitely not by city staff. They didn't represent the citizens. They left many important considerations off the table that you're hearing about now at these town halls. Frankly, I think they failed us. Our city council owns this item. You can and should tell city staff, thank you for getting this started. We've got this now. We're going to back up a bit and do it our way. Then throw out the schedule and do it right. Do it as though the next 100 years of development in the city depend on it. Do it as though balancing the city budget for the next 100 years depends on it. You, the city council, have every right and responsibility to do this. It's a chance here to be well planned and well thought out. And I even wonder if Norwood and some of the other property owners wouldn't be really happy to sit down at the table and really go for the gold with us on this. Thank you.
Thank you, David. The next person is Daniel Cole. Daniel, do you want to say anything? No? You just signed in. Okay, and Esther Mueller.
Thanks for this opportunity. I agree with what other folks have said about, the last opportunity to have a north-south lane that's going to accommodate traffic for the years to come, that we need to look at the parks that perhaps were in the original master plan, levels of service and transit. I'm having a very difficult time finding information. I see that we have the Q&As that were passed out tonight, which is great. I also sent you all an email on the 16th, and 16th of January, and I'll try not to repeat all those points. Basically, I see this as an opportunity for council to provide 21st century vision for the city. My kind of heartache over this is that right now your constituents along the Nevada corridor are having the future sort of thrust on them in terms of making that the Nevada transportation corridor. And it's really interesting that those folks aren't being able to keep the status quo, yet the owners of this property are coming in and want the rules that they had signed up for when they bought the property were too onerous, and Mr. Wasaki has suggested that we should level the playing field and have them do things as we are now. Basically, the main points from my email were that we've already subsidized part of this property through paying for SDS, which was $1 billion+ deal with Colorado Springs Utilities. I feel that the piecemeal development without a master plan is going to trigger things that are already stretched in terms of fire and police. We already gave back Tabor as citizens for police, and it's not enough for what we have now, let alone even for a few new pieces over here over the years. We need to think of our city in new ways, which is what they were trying to do in '88, even if the 1988 things, there was some reference to a telephone tower aren't needed. We need to include, not trade out for things we do need, cell towers, fiber network, transit, bike lanes, parks, that we can afford to maintain, renewable energy. I have a few more things for you all to think about. Right now, there's a lot of talk about millennials and creatives and unaffordable housing and the bike lanes and the mass transit, and I want to present something to you. Where do small construction entrepreneurs live? If I have my own business and I have my advertising on my truck, or if I have a trailer attached to my truck, I cannot live in many of the PUDs because they have covenants that restrict that. You also can't live in many of the existing neighborhoods because the streets have been done so small that there's not enough room between the house and the street to park your car. There's not enough room on the driveway to park cars. So basically what you're saying is you're going to eliminate 20% of the area of PUD if you develop Banning Lewis Ranch like the rest of the areas and the rest of the things we have in place. Also, if it's such a big deal that development has skipped over Banning Lewis Ranch, why? If these people are now shopping in the city, we should be getting additional sales tax from them, and they don't require services, so that should pay for road expansion. If it's because they work here, then why not put into place an employment tax for those who work in the city but don't live here? Those are some things that maybe could help us not be so worried about giving away everything for Banning Lewis Ranch development. Also, if the mayor's office allocated the tax dollars for this paid consultant study, what was the main requirement of the study? Was it to see if the development paid for itself or to prove that it will pay for itself? If the build-out does not go the way the original premises project, then there is no net increase in city and utility revenues, and even if there is, how does Tabor come into play? And what about Gallagher limiting property tax income from residential properties? And also it notes that there's like a net of utilities increase, and if there's a net utilities increase, doesn't it come back to us as ratepayers in reduced utility rates? So those items don't make any sense. And those were a couple of the things that were listed as the reasons why the city was entering into this agreement. So I respectfully request that you do right by the entire city and reject these changes and thoughtfully look at all the aspects.
Okay, thank you, Esther. And I don't know if some of your questions were answered in this printout, but there are some other ones that we are taking note of, and we should get back to you on that. Thank you. Lee Milner.
Thank you, Mr. President, President Pro Tem, council members. The comments tonight have been really quite extraordinary, and I really agree with all of them. Some of the staff that have been working very hard on this, and I understand that. One of the staff people was asked, well, what's the hurry? Well, the answer was, well, we've been working very hard on this. And I'm sure that's true. There's no doubt about it. I'd like to tell you a little story about Hudson Bay starts. Back up in the Hudson Bay, the very cold country up there, where trappers went out to trap. What they did was they went out just a mile or two and set up camp and figured out what they forgot that they need to go back to the base camp and get, and what they brought too much of. In this case, I think we have gone that mile or two, and we need to go back to the base camp and look at a lot more things. This is certainly one of the top 2 most important decisions that you will make in your 4 or 8 years on council, and to rush it is not the correct thing. Mr. Knight was asking Susan Davies about the open space, and the open space, there was an effort to put together a deal that gave a lot of, put out a lot of open space, particularly the bluffs, particularly to connect Jimmy Camp Creek with the existing Corral Bluffs, the 600 acres the city owns. But not just connect it and have houses right up to it, but have a buffer so that there's not houses right next to it. And that's the point of that. And there was a statement issued that I believe that the owners, well, that Norwood, at least one of the owners, sincerely believes. And I think they're looking at doing a major planning effort too. And I think this is rushing them. I don't see, and I know Mr. Siebert is here presumably for Norwood and can speak for them certainly better than I can, but I don't see them pushing for this to happen so quickly. That open space is very important. There's also land south of Highway 24 along the creeks. The idea, in my understanding of it, and as far as I know, one of the owners of Norwood, was just to not have to rip-wrap those areas so that they could build right up to them, but to allow the creeks, the dry washes, to lie in their natural state, and that there be a connection all the way down to Fountain, and also through the reservoir there. So I do trust Norwood's intentions, but I also believe that it's important to trust but verify, to quote a famous president that we all know, right, Mr. Pico? I think these things should be negotiated prior to just saying, we accept, we're going to change this annexation agreement. Norwood knew full well that what they were getting into. They bought the land for, I estimate, $1,555 an acre, which is a heck of a deal, and God bless them for getting a good deal. I also note that there are some developers in the area that perhaps need a quicker schedule than Norwood does. I think particularly of Oakwood Homes. They've done a good job of developing. They have done what Susan Davies said. They have, I guess it's really more than donated the land, but actually built parks and set up a mechanism to maintain the parks. The idea that TOPS can somehow come back and build parks and maintain them is fallacious, and as John Blackhawk mentioned, it's just not reasonable. I've been on the TOPS working committee, and I've seen us fund a bunch of parks, and now we're still having maintenance problems, and we've had a major reform. Now the parks part, the 20%, can be used for maintenance. That wasn't the original intent. It was a good change given the circumstance we were in, but we don't want to see that happen. When the bankruptcy court was the manager, I don't know what they were, but the deciders, I guess to quote another president, over the disposition of the ranch, they we were told, I approached the city and I said, why don't we make an offer for the Corral Bluffs open space that we want? And I was told, oh no, they're only going to accept one offer for the whole thing. And that was not true. Oakwood Homes came in, made an offer. Norwood came in and made an offer. No, excuse me, Ultra, pardon me. Ultra came in. So it was divided. So to say, and I've heard this said, that Oakwood Homes, we can't find a way to facilitate and deal with Oakwood Homes, I think is again fallacious, and we need to find an attorney who can figure out how to deal with this. And if you'll give me a little indulgence, I wasn't even going to talk about open space so much, and Susan did a wonderful job on that. What I was going to talk about is, after actually reading some of this information, how many of you here in the audience realize that the right-of-way for Banning Lewis Parkway, the city actually owns 300 feet of right-of-way? Do any of you, how many of you know that? A few of you know that. So what the city is proposing in this annexation agreement is to give back 158 feet to the adjoining owners and charge zero. We have tried many times to get workarounds on the east side, Circle, Academy, Powers. Each time we did a little bit better, but this is an opportunity that probably will not come up again, and I look at the opportunity in the next year or two with a transportation study to look at using Banning Lewis Ranch as a way to get around the east side of the city. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lee. The next person is Scott Campbell. Scott, I see you didn't sign up. I saw you walked in, and I heard earlier today you wanted to speak.
Thank you. Actually, I have a few handouts for council. Should I bring those up now?
Yeah, please do.
Thank you. Let me keep one for myself here. There we go. Could I have the extras, please?
Sure.
Thank you. Thanks, Richard. I guess I would like to express a couple of concerns here. One has to do with process and planning, and the other has to do with water. And I'll start with the process first. The memo that I'm handing council right now reviews what I think should be considered in terms of process for amending this annexation agreement. And by way of background, I would like to say first that I had the pleasure of helping form and lead a group back in 2013 called the Banning Lewis Collaborative. This was a group of city leaders in the business, development, conservation, philanthropic, military sectors. I know many of you here tonight intersected with that group back in 2013 and 2014. And this group had sought to help facilitate an acquisition of the 18,500 acres of Banning Lewis Ranch that were then owned by Ultra Petroleum, and integrate that land back into the economic and community fabric of our city. And what we wanted to do was to create an umbrella by which we could work with a civic-oriented buyer to facilitate an acquisition that would accomplish three things that are on this memo that I have for you. One is we wanted to support Colorado Springs' leading economic drivers, tourism and defense. Two was we wanted to create opportunities to develop land in ways that would accommodate new growth, enhance business and utilities infrastructure, and revitalize certain east side communities and neighborhoods. And then three, we wanted to execute a signature conservation effort sufficient to do a number of things. One is to protect an array of natural, paleontological, and recreational assets. And then also to encourage infill development and drive development back towards our city center. And then to also support a more efficient, well thought out, well planned public service sector infrastructure. Because the Banning-Lewis Master Plan, as it stands, is a document that it dated back to the 80s when the annexation agreement was cast. That's a dated document. There are many people who are not happy with that plan. The city does not have a current comprehensive plan. And it seems a little bit backwards to amend the annexation agreement before we get proper plans in place. A year ago, I had given suggestions to Jeff Green and Peter Wysocki that we consider a small area plan for Banning-Lewis that falls from the comprehensive planning process that we are engaged in now to be able to more thoughtfully integrate some of these concerns. When I worked with that group, I had the chance to work with a prospective development developer, prospective purchaser who was a developer, another one who was a conservation group, and two others who were private equity groups that did both conservation and development work. Now, Norwood had informed the group when it formed that at that time it did not have an interest in acquiring the property. And one of our concerns, because we didn't know who would be buying it, was how are we going to be certain that we can compel the purchaser to advance these objectives that we think are in the best interest of the community? And there were really two things that we had settled upon. One was that we would work with council, and we worked with individual members of council to create a strategic contingency by which the annexation agreement would be granted once planning was complete and once certain conveyances of land were made at fair market value to achieve not just open space objectives, but those other objectives we talked about for more efficient infrastructure, helping to drive infill development back towards our city center, making sure we're a more fiscally resilient and responsible city. The planning needs to come first. The conveyance was the mechanism by which we were going to essentially accomplish that. So in my memo here, I've outlined the process and some particular pieces that I feel are missing right now. We have the chance to do we have the chance to do something really great here, and I think much better than is what's going to be outlined in a rapid process like this. The other thing that, if I could just take a minute, that I would like to mention is the water management concerns factored high with the collaborative, and they still engage a lot of my attention today. And I've created a table for you here that builds on Mr. Wysocki's earlier table to council that told what the current annexation agreement does, what the amended and restated agreement will do. And just in looking at, I've looked at a few areas of the agreement in detail, and drainage is one. And I can tell you there are a lot of things that sound really good about the way that the amended agreement is handling drainage, but it also has a lot of shortfalls, and without planning that comes in front of any amended agreement, we're going to see those shortfalls realized. First of all, it refers to Jimmy Camp Creek and Sand Creek as closed basins. This implies that this is an area where water comes in, but it doesn't leave. Mexico City is a closed basin. The San Luis Valley is a closed basin. This is not a closed basin. Water comes in, and it's going to go downstream and affect our downstream communities. Now, what this is implying in having the quotes around closed basin is the concept that's embraced in the amended agreement that says we don't want development to precipitate runoff beyond the historic rates of flow. And that can be done. But what cannot be done, or what can be done better or worse, but never 100%, is reduce the total amount of volume that's going down. And that is the big issue that we're having in an unstable Fountain Creek system and with our downstream communities. So we are going to have excess urban runoff volume, and the amended annexation agreement does not address that. It also doesn't address the fact that development that occurs under the new 300 plus acre PUD provision creates a potential for really disaggregated site-by-site water management planning and not a comprehensive approach that is informed by best practices. There are no open space dedication requirements, not for recreation, but specifically to reduce floodplain encroachment and protect headwater tributaries and small drainages as permeable conveyances. There are no low-impact development requirements that look at reducing excess urban runoff volume. And finally, I think that the city really risks higher costs and more legal liabilities under this sort of inefficient and disaggregated, what could be a very disaggregated approach to managing stormwater. I would be happy to talk with council at other times about some of these concerns in greater detail. They are very significant. And when we talked on the Banning Lewis Collaborative with representatives from the Lower Arkansas Valley Water Conservancy District and the Fountain Creek District, there were concerns that development under the current master plan would create exponential greater water management costs than what the city was already facing at the time. And let's keep in mind our stormwater fee is only covering about a third of our identified infrastructure backlogs. We can't afford more problems with water management. This has to be thought through up front. I'm sorry to take so much time. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Scott Weiser.
Good evening, Mr. President, council members. I'm going to try and be mercifully brief here. I want to give a number of presumptions and ask 3 questions. The original Banning Lewis Plan Annexation Agreement in Book 5557, pages 410 and 411, with respect to the Banning Lewis Parkway, specifically says that the developer shall dedicate the right-of-way to the city. It says that construction may be phased, but then again in B2 it says they shall dedicate the right-of-way. So the first question is, has the Banning Lewis Parkway right-of-way been dedicated to the city as was suggested by Mr. Minor, and is it the property of the city? That would be a legal question. The next givens are existing high-density zoning remains in place under the new proposed plan. The developers have the right to build out to that density if they choose, as Mr. Siebert told me at one of the prior meetings. Colorado Springs can continue to expand north, south, and east of Banning Lewis Ranch over time. And given the density projections are based on developer input and current density development such as Oakwood, the question is the need for the Banning Lewis Parkway at 300 feet that the city traffic engineer has stated is not there anymore accurate, given the fact that if the developers decide to build out to the original density, which they can do, we're giving away a major highway. And the last question is, should the right-of-way be preserved for future limited access beltway around eastern Colorado Springs using connection to Powers and I-25 North and back to I-25 South?
Okay, thank you, Scott. Is there anybody else who would like to speak that's here tonight? We didn't get everybody to sign up. Walter, I don't know if you looked at the sheet. You have there's about 75 answers, and 25 of them are about your questions. So I mean, we're happy to have you come up, but I just don't want you to. If we've already answered the questions, I don't want you to come up and ask them again. But you're welcome to if you like. Come on up.
Be turned around. Does anybody know?
It can't.
There it goes.
underneath.
Yeah.
So let me help you. Let me help you. Hold on. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Let's turn it around.
No, that's okay. Yeah, I have some other additional issues.
You have additional questions? Yeah. Okay.
Does it speak? Does he?
Yeah, it
Is it on?
sounds like that's working, yeah.
Okay.
Gonna feed
And,
through- That's not, that mic is not going to feed through where they're recording. So you can use it if you'd like, but this is the one that works.
Yeah, use the hand.
Will
That'd
it
be
pick
good.
up here?
Yeah.
Okay, Walter Lawson. Sprawl can inflate the costs of new water and sewer hookups by 20 to 40%. It's a quote from Robert Burchell, who is a well-known expert from Rutgers University, writes on fiscal impact analysis and sprawl costs, a book by that name. We're glad to get the questions, but it took 55 days. And we need council to exercise its check and balance authorities. We need a better and a more sensitive system and a more responsive system to get things done. And you can't have a process like this without improving that. In fact, the process, I feel, is really anti-citizen. We are being hustled in time, as we know, and setting it back a few weeks doesn't change that. But we're also being jammed in process. We have codes being in parallel on top of development plan criteria, on top of planning commission approvals. They've already recommended, it's gone by. Instead of a linear process where we get to see that out front and get a preview, it's gone. And this is all on top of the council process. Not the way we normally do things. In fact, you're having more secret meetings, I believe, than we have had public meetings so far, or close. The proposal, in addition to the process, the proposal is also anti-citizen. It is owner uber alles. The citizens just have had the poorest negotiation. We've not been part of the game. We need a better process. In the midst of all this, Pam Zubek has come out with the best report I've seen in 47 years on any major land use proposal. And by the way, we've had appeals that have gone on longer than this process is scheduled for, as one indicator. But Pam deserves an award for highlighting all the issues. She's raised a number of red flags, too many to bring up here. But they do obviously suggest a need for a real citizen process. And so I ask that the council sees its core responsibility role as land use decider and create a real process, bring in the kinds of consultants we need. Brent Todarian, for those of you who saw him, was one of those, and there are others who would be great speakers as part of this process that we need to have. And deal from a framework, not just of this little part of 1/3 that we're getting kind of over-focused on, but the development capabilities are still there to have 180,000 population on Banning Lewis Ranch. And that's what we should deal with. The vehicle counts that come out of that, the pollution, the traffic, and all the other impacts are really what we should be dealing with, not just 1/3 of it or a small part. Oakwood. How was Oakwood selected as what is really now our model planning and our model economics for this process? When did we have a public process that made that the best thing that we could come up with? It's just more sprawl. There's nothing special about it. I would ask you, have we studied the new towns? And I know we have not in our process of comprehensive planning. New towns like Columbia, Maryland, Reston, Virginia, Kentlands, Maryland. There's a lot to be learned from those new towns, and I especially recommend looking at Columbia, which has for the past 10 years been rated as one of the top most livable cities in the country. In 2016, it became the #1 livable city.
I think there are a lot of lessons to be learned from that. And even the differences can be instructive from an experience like that. And I believe they did this, if I remember rightly, with open space and parks of about 36%. So I think we just have not explored or taken in the best we could do. We have just taken another piece of sprawl and said, that's our model. That's what we're looking at for the next 100 years. I think that's just wrong and a mistreatment of the citizens, plus the economic liabilities that go with it.
Should probably wrap it up a little bit, Walter, just if you can.
Okay. So I would just underscore that I ask you to start a real council process and do this as we normally do it, fully, correctly, and with all the normal input we would make, instead of this force and squeeze process where we have huge issues that we haven't treated properly yet.
Okay. Thank you, Walter. All right, Jeff, you said that staff was going to talk about some of the answers to questions. Did you want to talk about that, have them talk about that now? Or?
Mr. President, all the information that individuals have hard copies is currently listed on the city's website. Okay. Staff's here to answer any specific questions that you as the council may have based upon citizen comments tonight. What I would request is that, we can go through all the questions this evening, but I think that would be not a good use of our time or for the citizens' time. And so I think it would be better for the citizens to be able to take the information, review it. If they have any other additional questions, they can propose that to city staff or to the city council.
Okay. Okay, that's a good idea. Are there questions from up here that we want to ask based on the information? Yeah. Well, no, we haven't looked at this, but based on what the public has brought up, I'd like to get Kathleen Krager up here to talk about the Banning Lewis Parkway, because that's been a subject that has been brought up several times tonight. Is that okay? Yep.
Thank you, Kathleen Krager, the Division Manager for Traffic Engineering. And I think most of what I heard tonight revolves around the idea of Banning Lewis Parkway as that east side bypass for the city. First, let me state that when the original annexation went in place, Banning Lewis Parkway was not planned as that east side bypass. It stops at Woodman Avenue or Woodman Road, and to continue north, as you want to vision this, and do yet another circle around the city, as if we didn't have enough of those, but do yet another circle around the city toward I-25, you would have to go through the Black Forest area. I have to be honest, with 41 years of experience behind me, I don't see that happening for the city of going through Black Forest in order to connect to I-25. On the south side, Banning Lewis Ranch Parkway was proposed to connect to the Powers Boulevard alignment, and then continue on that alignment and swing back to the west as you circle around Fountain. Even that part of Powers Boulevard is under consideration between the town of Fountain and CDOT, whether that section of Powers Boulevard should ever be built. I want to sort of explain about what that bypass would look like. And is it a bypass, or is it simply a street to use Banning Lewis Ranch to provide access to Banning Lewis Ranch as it was originally planned for? And the reason why it was planned for an expressway, something with interchanges, sort of a minor freeway as it were, is because not the residential density, but the commercial density of the original annexation proposal was so great that it required that level of roadway. Now, if we're looking at a predominantly residential with neighborhood and community retail, some office space, but not a lot, you have a lot less traffic with that, and now you need a grid street system that provides that access to the neighborhoods. And for one thing, one that provides more access to east-west roads than we could build if that were a freeway section. let me give you an example from past history to sort of talk about whether or not you need that bypass. When C-470 was built in Denver, that it was 1981, 82 when it opened. And there was basically no development south of County Line Road. There was one very small residential development that had about 100 homes in it that dipped south of C-470, nothing else. So C-470 was built. We started looking at the traffic volumes on the east-west arterial streets north of C-470. None of the volumes on those other parallel facilities dropped because C-470 was built. No one drove south half a mile, 2 miles to use C-470 for their trip. Or if they did, other people filled in at the arterial streets because they dropped down. What C-470 really provided was the capacity needed to accommodate all of Highlands Ranch development and the intense retail development between County Line Road and C-470. It was not there to serve as a bypass to make trips faster for existing, Denver metro area development. If we were to build a freeway that could become a bypass at the Banning-Lewis Parkway, that's way too far east for anyone, say, on Powers to go all the way over to Banning-Lewis and use it. People don't divert their trips that far to save time, but because by the time you've driven over there, you've lost any time that you've saved going to Banning-Lewis Parkway. So what it would do is have excess capacity to continue with development further to the east, or continued sprawl. Rather, that would be the city developing further east of Banning-Lewis Ranch, or the county or some other jurisdiction developing. But we would be providing the capacity for that further development to the east, just as C-470 provided the capacity, although that was planned, for the development to the south in the Highlands Ranch area. So if you're worried about sprawl, excess capacity is that way to provide the sprawl. At this level of development that we're assuming, a 4 to 6 lane arterial street with the appropriate spacing of east-west roadways so that you can adequately use it is really what you need for Banning-Lewis Parkway. So why give away or return some of that right-of-way and go from 300 feet to 142 feet? The 142 feet is our city standard for right-of-way for a 6-lane arterial street. To take excess right-of-way beyond that 6-lane street that we envision building becomes sort of a wasteful use of public money. First of all, we're taking land out of taxation and out of development and leaving it sitting there. Second, not only does it sit there, but you have to maintain that land, whether you used it for a roadway or not. And that means potential watering, mowing, picking up of trash, all those things that right-of-ways are known for. When you have a big right-of-way, it can become a real city burden that you have to now maintain that right-of-way. So as a good engineering practice, we try to determine the appropriate size of right-of-way, get that size of right-of-way, and not have excess that is going to be a burden to us in the future. I'll give you one more point to think about. Our view long-term in technology is not looking at having to do wider roadways and wider right-of-ways. So the thought is that in the next 30 years, we're going to have a fair number of autonomous vehicles driving on our road, if not virtually all autonomous vehicles driving on our road. You may be in the car, but you're not going to be actively driving. And the roadway need for an autonomously driven vehicle goes from 11 feet of width down to 8 feet of width. And it also shrinks in the other direction as well. You can follow cars much closer than we do. But going from that 11 feet to 8 feet, what it really means is roads that we currently have as 4 lanes can be restriped as 6 lanes. 6 lanes roads can be restriped as 10 lanes. So I don't want to end up with this sort of football field mentality of right-of-way that we're really never going to use, but we've committed ourselves or our citizens or taxes that our citizens pay to maintaining that right-of-way needlessly.
Great, Kathleen. That was very helpful. David?
Just one follow-up question. It was very helpful, and I think I followed you completely, and I hope I did.
I'll accept 3/4 of the way.
Really? Can you repeat all that again?
One of the citizens asked a question about change in density, that we have a, and Mr. Cope may be able to speak about this, that the Witchler Dice, whatever, study is based on the density that is Oakwood right now, but going forward, we can change that standard.
Yes.
Does anything that you've talked about change, assuming that the market propels this to have a much higher density population?
Certainly, it does. Although to a certain extent, as you go higher density, you get more trips that stay right within the area rather than moving out. But all that technical aside, I can tell you that I'm much more comfortable reviewing the entire Banning Lewis Ranch under our standard procedure of you would come in with a master plan or a development area, and we would ask for a more detailed traffic study and then make the requirements of what's necessary to serve that developed area. The problem when you try to look at 20,000 acres, say, and plan your roadway system down to the length of your left turn lanes is that you're really guessing into the future. And obviously what was assumed in the late 1980s wasn't a very good guess because we haven't gotten there yet. When I take it in smaller chunks, it gives me a lot more ability to study it in detail, just as we do any development in Colorado Springs, and make the appropriate decisions on what that roadway should be. So if they come in with a much greater density in a certain area or completely different land uses, we have that ability to say, oh, you're going to need more roadways. And developers need us to tell them that, because if they build a development that does not have the appropriate roadways, that development will suffer and strangle. So they need that advice just as much as we at the city need it.
Okay. Don?
So following up on that, so we don't need, I'll borrow Andy's language, a super slab to nowhere. We just need a 6-lane road, but is there a quid pro quo that we should be seeking for a second northwest or a couple of major east-west roadways in there that are not yet designated and platted out or drawn on any type of map?
Yes, and that's what our master plan development allows us to do. And the truth of the matter is, if you build Banning Lewis...
Let me interrupt you right there, because when you read the agreement, it's the existing master plan that stays. So, I mean, it's only if someone comes in and asks for a zone change will it generate a new master plan. But, I mean, there's no intent to go in with a blank sheet of paper and draw a new master plan. So why are we not asking for this quid pro quo at the beginning?
Well, because we currently have hard zoning, and you can have, Peter, if I say any planning thing wrong, you know, we currently have hard zoning across that property, and every time they develop something, they're going to be asking for a zoning change because it's not going to match that hard zoning that was given in the 1987. So, and just as Oakwood Homes development has done right now, they come in with their master plan, and then with each filing, we look and say, you know, now's the time you're going to need to complete this collector loop. You're going to need to head north-south with this roadway. And one of the things that gives us a better opportunity, the Banning Lewis Parkway basically had interchanges about every 1.5 miles, and that was the only access you could allow. And so it really restricted what the roadway system can look like. Now I can have more east-west roads, more minor arterials instead of making everything a principal arterial, better collector streets, and really get a roadway system, a grid system that fits better for this type of development.
Well, let me concentrate on the east-west roads. Is there anywhere in the master plan today that's has the continuation of Dublin or Barnes or Carefree all the way to the eastern side of the ranch?
Let me give you an example. The ranch does not touch Mark Shuffle Road at Barnes. And Barnes is built out to Mark Shuffle Road, and then beyond there it sort of becomes a trail, we'll call it. There are other developments along that Barnes alignment that if they come in before Banning Lewis Ranch, they're going to be expected to build barns, you know, to the type of facility that the city wants for their frontage. If Banning Lewis Ranch develops before one of those developers does, and there's no connection there, they're going to need to build barns, and there, of course, will be that developer agreement that they get paid back for some of barns that isn't in their area. We do that probably every week in the city, where we've got to say, okay, if you're going to jump ahead and come in first, you need to get the roadway system that takes you out to the area. And if the other if developers would just come in at that nice equal pace and they all come in like dominoes and fall, my life would be much easier, but they don't. So we're constantly having to look at what one person has to build, and then another person pays them back, and that type of thing. But that's how our whole street system is based in Colorado Springs.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions from up here? Any other comments anybody else wants to make from city staff? All right, well, seeing none, thank you everybody for coming. We really appreciate it. Lots of good comments tonight, and we will keep this as a work in progress. Thanks so much.
The other way. Oh, yes.